Okay, well, we're going to go to a different set of characters here, completely different, because they're not Warner Brothers, they're a comic strip character, called, and everybody knows the name, Dennis the Menace. In this case, I'm going to draw Dennis and his little dog Ruff. So I'll take the whole page here, and do the two of them together. A lot of circles in cartooning. So, let's do basic. A couple of things that are really important to make Dennis Dennis, and that's getting nose, ears, hair lined up just a certain way. Line of the cheek, ear, this little mouth. And comes the part that's never the same every time, but get it close. Always 5 freckles, 3 on one side and 2 on the 5 on one side and 2 on the other. Unless I got the head looking the way I like it, and in this case I'm lucky because I like it. This little jumper outfit he wears all the time. Crease in the pants. And these are quick sketches, but its challenge is to have it come out the way you want it to. And I'm satisfied with this one, pleased with it. Strapping up his shirt. And I'll give him this little thing there that turns his eye looking towards us. And then Ruff, he's kind of a fun character too. I'm never sure how he's going to turn out, but get a couple of things in the right place, he'll be all right. Get one ear up, one ear down. And he has kind of hair in his eyes just like Dennis. And there's like 2 parts to him. There's this front and his rear end. Stands on these big paws. And I kind of like to do this little bone in his mouth. And he's a shaggy dog, that's why we give him that's the way he was created by Hank Ketchum. So we'll work hard to get that shaggy look He's a friendly dog, so he's always wagging his tail. And he's quite often out in the dust and dirt, so we get a suggestion of a little dirt on the body. And the most he ever says is wolf. I'm sure he's got a tight grip on that bone. Dennis and his pal Ruff. Hi, Greg. How's that?
Yeah. And sign it.
This is the best part. How's that?
Very good.
Well, Mutt and Jeff, they called me from the syndicate last summer and said that the man that was doing it was getting pretty old. He was ready to retire, and it was going to a new syndicate, and would I be interested in drawing it? Of course, I said yes.
And that's basically the story of how George Brysacker took over the reins of America's oldest daily comic strip.
It's a little bit intimidating. Bud Fisher, who created the strip, was such a genius, and you go back and you read that stuff and realize that he was the first person to do that. He created the characters. The strip was once a household word, and there were Broadway plays, and it really had captured the imagination of the country.
George is certainly no stranger to comic strips. Since he joined the Charlotte Observer in 1973, he has had 2 strips of his own. But that doesn't mean there haven't been problems with his new strip.
Okay, when I'm drawing the characters now, I generally just loosely pencil them like this so that, you know, I get a feeling for the size and the shape. And then after I get that part, then I go in and I start refining the thing. Okay, now see, this is a little crude, but it does show you what I mean. That, you know, the point is made that if you have the 2 characters standing side by side, you normally have to, you know, have one figure bending quite dramatically or something like that because of the difference in their height. That seems to be a constant problem.
The Mutt and Jeff strip has seen a slight decline in popularity over the years, but George is trying to change that by bringing the strip more up to date, like with these panels.
The first one, Cicero was asking his mother to go to the park and play, and she says, of course he can't. Well, he's going to the park to play a Pac-Man game, you know, what all the kids are doing.
Video game.
This one runs the following day, run next Tuesday, and this is about Frisbee. And come to find out, little Cicero is taking the hubcap off the family car to play Frisbee. But you know, these are 2 things that probably haven't been done in Mutt and Jeff for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And,
George works about 3 weeks ahead on the strip. He does most of his writing on weekends. Then on Mondays, he starts penciling and refining.
Generally, I don't have a lot of trouble with ideas. The characters and the situation, it's universal. And you know, if you're observant of what goes around in the real world, I think that you can easily apply it to Mutt and Jeff or any other comic strip, and it'll virtually write itself.
The strip is inked by good friend Jim Scancarelli, who also inks the Gasoline Alley comic strip drawn by Dick Moores, who lives near Asheville. Doing Mutt and Jeff is a challenge to which George Brysacker has aptly risen. His style and sense of humor will certainly continue to inject new life into the characters that a generation has grown up with.
My feeling about doing a strip is the longer I'm doing it, the more I enjoy it. These are delightful little characters. The type of humor that we need to write for the strip is vaudevillian or slapstick, and I find it thoroughly enjoyable.
Joan, one of my students, sent in this lesson of a landscape, and she's following reference material from our textbook. She selected this Block Island scene, and her attempt at it was quite good. She indicated a dog. This is a lesson that's going to involve the landscape with an animal. and she wanted to use her little dog. And I wanted to indicate on her painting with a tissue that some of the things that she has done, we might improve a little bit here. Okay, now what I did, I put the tissue with my suggested corrections underneath an acetate overlay, and that's what I'll use to paint on.
Hank now paints his suggestions on the acetate overlay. At the end, he'll explain all the reasons for his changes.
Okay, over the painted overlay that I had applied, I'm putting a tissue where I'll make a comment or two about the changes I made. I thought Joan did a good job on the texture of the building. It seems the composition is improved when the building's a little to the left, and also to move dog to the right, over here. That makes a better balance for the composition. And to try for more natural greens in the foliage. And and you want to correct the roof angle right in there. The roof angle wants to be steeper. Joan's going to get a letter with this critique, explaining more in detail these adjustments I'm suggesting. Down here, the sunlight, much stronger here, and the cool shadow over here. Okay, now the tissue overlay I put on to verbally explain adjustments I made on the painted overlay are complete. It's attached to the painting. And when Joan looks at this critique, and the advantage of this acetate, of course, is wonderful, because she can, without me damaging her painting, can see the adjustments I've made by raising and lowering the overlay. The dog is moved over to the right. The building is moved over to the left. More vegetation crawling on the building. The strong cloud in the sky touching the roof has been softened and blended into the upper sky to put more attention on our center of interest, with the strong, warm, sunny side and the cool, subdued shadow side, giving the center of interest the prominence it deserves in this composition. And Joan can, by comparison, see the greens are not quite as strong as she had. They're more natural, what you'd see in nature. And she has her little dog here, rather than being centered off to the right, looks into the picture for a more natural composition.
After the pencil drawing is done, the next step is to square the page up with your T-square and tape the paper down. You don't want it moving. Place the Ames guide on the area that you've prescribed for the lettering. There are numbers scrolled at the bottom that I'm pointing to now. Set the Ames guide at 3.5. You then use the second row down, put your pencil and draw it across using the T-square as your guide for the Ames guide. Put it into alternating holds to get the guidelines for lettering. Now, the lettering is done with the B6 pen, getting a rough idea from your layouts in pencil of the amount of space that each word is going to take.
This takes practice also.
In fact, before you even attempt to letter, the best thing to do is to draw a whole series of guidelines, fill up a whole page, and just do the alphabet. And you don't have to know how to draw to letter. But it is also important to maintain a consistency with your letters. And even if they're different from the way anybody else would letter them, they'll still look correct if they're consistent.
They can also be a form of expression, can't they? Help to enhance certain aspects of the story?
By making that bolder, and I've used the B5 to do that, it gives the impression to the reader that that should be said louder, or there's a stress on that word that makes it more important than the rest of the text.
It's slanted a little too.
Yeah, just to make it look a little different. And the reason it's slanted is because if I do it straight up and down, the thicker letter has a tendency to look crowded. And if I slant it a little bit, I find that I have a little bit more room. Now I use the B6 to do the balloons. I want to make sure that the balloons have enough space around the words so that the words will not look crowded. Sound effects, the way you letter sound effects, should approximate the actual sound. You notice that now I'm using a thicker pen, which should give the connotation that the scream gets louder at this point. Actually, the lettering should give the effect to the reader of the sound that the sound effect is making. I'm now going to put the borders on. I use my triangle to draw in my borders, being careful not to put too much ink in the pen or else it'll run under the triangle. Now your lettering and your bordering is done. The last step is just to erase the pencil marks.
I'm going to draw my alter ego. His name is what is his name? Ha! You'll see as he develops, he is the court jester. He's a court jester who has tried to make the king laugh repeatedly for the last 50 years that I've been doing this. I've given him several names One was Jester Gigolo, another was Harley Quinn, and the third one is just me, because that's the story of my life. I've been attempting to make the king laugh, and in this case, the king happens to be a syndicate or a magazine editor. And he has an alter ego on a stick. And his name is Bob. B-A-U-B. And he looks very much like his boss. Except that he's really funnier than his boss. And of course, I'm about to show you in the background the evil benefactor that has plagued him through the course of the life of the Daily and Sunday comic strip Short Ribs. That old, gnarly king who has no sense of humor at all. And one other character who is actually one of the Jester's best friends, the headsman. Even though he's one of the Jester's best friends, he is a threat that the Jester has to face, because every so often the king will yell off with his head, and as friendly as they are, the rules of the court have to prevail. However, off with his head usually to this day indicates off with the bobble's head and not the Jester himself. And there. How's that?
Very good.
You have 5 freckles on one side and 3 on the other.
I'll stay on that. When did you drive down? We came down Thursday night. Set up Thursday evening here, and then spend here ever since we leave tomorrow.
This is the drawing I showed you just previously. This is the carbon on the back, which is just taking a pencil and rubbing it against it. So I can put it against the sketchbook, I can press down on my drawing and get the drawing centered exactly where I want it. Now I'm going to do some inking. First pen point I'm going to use is a B5.5. It's a lettering pen point, but it gives a nice line, a nice static line as far as no thin and thick, which I need for Sally Forth's face. So now, for the rest of the drawing, I'm going to use a brush. I like the variance of line. And as far as Sally Forth goes, that's the only part where you pretty much don't want the thick and thin, just because it messes with what the character looks like. I'm going to use a Winsor Newton brush. I'm going to use a number 1. And just off screen here, I have a scratch piece of paper, which I run the ink, make sure I get a nice line. And then I start inking. Now if you'll notice, I also have a little piece of scratch paper underneath my hand. That's so I don't get any grease on the paper, and also it helps me so I don't smudge what I've already inked if I happen to go over. Because as you can see, when my hand is going over the drawing, if I just happen to get on some wet ink, if I didn't have this piece of paper here, it would smear the drawing, and I would hate that. I want a nice thin and thick. Makes the drawing pop a little bit. And I also want to make sure I'm not inking lines, I'm inking the form of the character. Another reason I like to use a brush, especially on sketchbook drawings like this, is the paper tends to bleed. And if I use a crow quill brush or another kind of nib, I won't get the smooth line that I want. So for especially sketchbook, for this kind of paper, I like to use a brush to get a smoother line. So everything I did to prep this drawing, I don't want to be thinking about the proportions and any other aspect when I'm inking. I want to focus on the form. So all that kind of stuff I do to make sure I have a clean drawing here is so there isn't that constant penciling and erasing, because all that erasing just ends up to roughen the surface. And once again, then you get a line that bleeds all over the paper. When you get to the inking point, you want a nice, clean working area. Otherwise, it's just going to be a big mess. Sometimes, if you're worried about how steady your line's going to be, you could use a ruler. Even if you have a brush, you just run the metal against the ruler and you can get a straight line, and you just kind of tilt the ruler up, and this way you can get a nice straight line, especially with something I'm drawing her holding the sketchbook you're holding, like she's presenting it to you. So I just want a nice straight line for that. This is a B6 lettering point, and I wanted to do a little bit of detail here. So it's this little just necklace she has. So It gives a nice line. Once again, this one doesn't have a thick to thin line, but I don't necessarily want it for this. And get her necklace. And remember too, when I'm simplifying the form for this. I'm not worried about drawing every individual link, how it links together. I'm just generally doing the shape and the shadow so you get an impression of it. Because a lot of cartooning is simplifying. I use a whiteout and I just dab it in there, and that way it'll go in the foreground of that line I had behind. Now I'm going to use a croquis point and just touch it up a little bit. And the croquis point gives a nice thin and thick line as well. And it's nice for little detail areas. You can do this with a brush as well. This is the lines, the pages to the sketchbook. You can do this with a brush as well, but I want to show you a couple different pen points. It's okay to move the paper around as well. I'm doing this primarily because the other side has, of course, the wet ink from what I just inked. So I don't want to drag my hand through that. Always think of the light source. Add a little bit of shadow underneath this. Add a little depth to the buttons. And this, once again, is a B6 lettering point. And you probably can't see, but I actually lightly penciled the lettering out beforehand. Once again, just so when I'm inking, I'm not worried about placement. Last but not least, for a black and white drawing like this, I want to add some dark areas to it. So I'm actually going to make the sketchbook all dark as well. Now you can see how wet that area is. That's an area I'm staying away from. And the last thing I do, just a little bit of touch up here and there, just to add some depth to it. Maybe a little shadow. And there you have it. After the ink is dry, I just take an eraser, I erase any light lines, and you have a finished sketch. Hope you enjoyed the little tutorial, and wishing you all the best.
We're ready to learn the art of inking. Your illustrations may be works of art, but they can't be reproduced by the printer unless black India ink is applied to the original pencil drawing. That means that someone has to ink over the initial penciled artwork with either a drawing pen or a paintbrush, transforming each illustration into a carefully inked final product. However, an inker is not just a person who traces a pencil drawing. The inker must be an artist himself or herself. A gifted inker can make mediocre penciling look great, but a mediocre inker can also make great penciling look dull.
Inking requires concentration. Therefore, you should make sure your posture is correct. Don't slouch over your drawing board. Sit up straight. Ruling lines with your brush is far more difficult than using a pen, but the results are usually worth it. Just hold the ruler at about a 45-degree angle and run your brush along it like this. By varying the pressure of your brush, you can make lines of any thickness. Lines ruled with a brush are not as stiff as those made with a pen. Actually, they tend to have more character.
Become equally adept at both pen and brush. The brush requires more time to master, but if you use a pen exclusively, your finished drawings may seem stiff and lifeless. Now, these examples of brushwork are called feathering. Notice how some strokes go from thin to thick. They're all done with the same brush, merely by varying the pressure you use. In case you're wondering, John is using a Winsor Newton No. 3 sable hairbrush. Same brush, different effect. John is now using the side of the brush rather than the tip. This is a very helpful technique for inking hair on a character's head, for example.
Experiment with your tools. Search for different effects. Use anything imaginable to get the effect you need. Open your mind. That's what art is all about.
Here's a well-inked panel. See how the lines vary in thickness? They're heavier on the underside of the bodies, away from the light. Now this gives solidity to the figures. And look how clear the picture is, even though there are a number of figures and a wealth of little details. You see, a good inker ensures that drawings will be understandable, no matter how complicated they might be. One way to achieve this is to use heavy blacks to make the figures stand out from the background.
Here's the same panel, but it's overworked. It's too dark and there are too many lines. When it's reduced to comic book panel size, it's going to be tough to understand. Too much texture has destroyed the basic beauty of the drawing, and it's almost impossible to read.
On the other hand, here's an example of the other extreme. The inker here didn't use enough variety in his lines. The blackened areas are too skimpy and spotty, and they have no pattern. His lines are almost all the same weight, with no feeling of thick or thin. The characters, as you can see, just seem to blend into the background. It's boringly blah. Now, it's just as bad to keep a panel too light as it is to overwork it. The secret is to know when and where to place your strong black areas. Too little or too much will ruin your drawing.
The black areas here are concentrated on just one side of the figure. This technique accomplishes two things. First, it gives a feeling of dimension. Second, it directs the reader's attention to the character's face by framing it with massive black areas. The figures here are drawn realistically. See how bold and simple the heavy black shadows are? Again, there's one bright light source illuminating one side of the body and casting the other side in deep shadow. Keep your inking simple, with just one definite light source in each panel.
Now here, the main purpose is to create a mood of fear and menace.
Look at both panels. Now concentrate on the simplified panel. The blackened areas are simple vertical or horizontal forms, thereby creating a calm, motionless scene.
The dramatic exception is the large slanting black masses on the winged gargoyle, which add a sudden feeling of shock, of impending danger. Also, look at the large vertical black designs within the fence bars. They unify the picture. Now, without them, the whole design would seem to fall apart. Here, the black designs seem to be jumping all over the place. They're creating a feeling of chaos and action. But the pattern, although it's seemingly jumpy, is really quite consistent. It rivets your eye on the action.
Now the black areas are arranged here to create a pleasing circular movement. These two slashes across the bottom add action and unity. Here's our final example.
The light coming from the left is casting everything on the right in deep shadow. The heavy black shadow area emphasizes the feeling of a horror story. Now, just by looking at the design of the panel, you know it's no humor or romance strip.
Notice the way the black areas in the background give a feeling of realism and detail without detracting from the two important figures.
This panel is heavy, it's melodramatic, and yet it's clear. In a word, it's marvel. In summation, the penciler draws his panels in, what else? Pencil. Then they must be finished by the inker. Now it's up to the inker to decide where and how boldly to apply his black ink. The inker figures prominently in determining the mood, the design, and the clarity of each panel. Thus, when you seriously study comic book artwork, be conscious of two complementary elements: the basic pencil drawing and the inked version. See? And you thought it was going to be complicated.
All right, I'm going to be inking up one of Dan DeCarlo's very last commissioned sketches he did for my good friend Greg Beda. I believe he drew this, from what Greg said, just a few months before his passing away. So it's a real privilege to be inking Dan DeCarlo again. I did some Archie comic books of Dan's way back when. I'm talking 10, 15 years ago. So with Betty and Veronica here, I usually, because I have more ink on my brush right away, I'll start with something that's nice and solid so I can get some of that ink on the page. And then I don't want totally a lot of ink if I go in on some other detailed areas. So we can hit some of her arms here. I like to start with some nice bolder areas, like her back on this side is a nice big heavier line. As you know, the Archie style, we like to go a little heavier. If you can do one big brush stroke like that, a nice clean brush stroke in one fluid motion, that's nicer. That's a heavier line on her bottom leg over here. Now on the top legs, where the sunlight is shining, it's just a little bit thinner. So we can give some weight where the shadow would be on the bottom of her calf over here. The top line is just going to be a little bit thinner. Again though, if you can get it in one smooth, complete line, that's a little easier. Move the page. I usually do a backhanded stroke, as opposed to like drawing with a pencil. When you're inking, a nice gliding backhanded stroke works best for me. And I think most inkers would agree with that. Little thin lines in here on her toes, where you don't need to go so heavy. Veronica's dainty little feet. And then some of these littler details in here around the ankle. You want those to be nice and delicate. So I just re-dipped my ink, so I'm going to use some of that on the hair again. A nice big black area where I have too much ink on the brush. Instead of going over here on my scratch sheet and dabbing some of it off and wasting the ink, I go with my fresh ink on an area that needs a lot of ink. Classic highlights. I use the Kolinsky brush, sable brushes. Winsor Newton is probably the most well-known brush for inking. Most professional inkers use the same. Connoisseur also makes a good one. Princeton does Kolinsky brushes too, with the Kolinsky hair. It's just supple hair. It holds a lot of ink. As you can see, I dipped this a minute ago or so, and I've been using it a lot, and there's still a lot of ink in this brush. Gotta have a good brush to do inking. Now, unfortunately, this isn't a premium grade of paper. Usually it's a nice, sturdy 2-3 ply bristle board, and this is more of a inkjet paper. It's thick, it's more of a cardstock, I should say. So it's starting to buckle a little bit, but it's still holding the ink pretty well. No spider webbing, so that's good. Delicate on the nose. A little more deft touch on his nose, her little eyebrow. See, now I've got less ink on my brush, so I can go in here and do some of the delicate stuff. Her neckline. Nice thin lines in here. Let's see, her rib cage is a thin line. We don't want it to be heavy. Her bikini. Looks like Dan forgot a belly button. I'm going to put a belly button in. That's my inker's discretion here. Alright. These fingers over here, we don't need to go heavy on these. We want to create the perception that they're more delicate. Don't want to give her man hands. See, I haven't even dipped this brush in the last 3-4 minutes now, and it's still got a ton of ink in it. Alright, a little bit more ink. So you can see a little bottle of ink will go a long way. One line on her whole leg there. Okay. I always start with the objects in the foreground first, and then I work my way back. Seems like a obvious thing to do, but a lot of people, they don't know there's a method to the madness. So you're working thicker and then thinner as you go back. These lines in the background where these little weeds, for example, are, I'm just going to touch those light so that the foreground objects are thicker and heavier. The background objects are a little lighter or delicate, so Veronica pops better. Alright, Veronica's almost done. A lot of people ask me about the glove. That's not because my hand is hurt. I don't have carpal tunnel. It just helps my hand glide across the paper more. The oil's in my hands or perspiration, then your hand will stick on the paper, and this helps it slide across the paper. Some stripes on her bikini. And to show like there's some sunlight, I'm going to go lightly up towards the top, and then I'm going to give it heavier on the bottom so it looks like a nice dark stripe that's got a little sunshine on the top. Some delicate lines up top to a heavier full stripe underneath. And her nice lips. This is where you need to make sure you don't have a lot of ink on your brush. I often ink the top lip in fully, like she's got lipstick on. And there, Veronica is done. Now we can move on to Betty. And like a little mistake there, that's where you use a little bit of whiteout or whatever. Some foreground lines. Sitting near the edge of the water. Alright. Betty's up. Here we go. What I like about this sketch, I don't know if it comes through completely, but it's a rough sketch. You know, Dan obviously did it a little bit quicker. It's still awesome, but it gives me a little bit more challenge because it is rough to smooth it out. I don't like if the pencils are super tight. then it truly is more of just a tracing. For this, I have to use a little bit more of my skills. On a personal note, I used to be more Team Betty. When people ask me, who would you pick, Betty or Veronica? Betty, of course. She's going to be more loyal. She's an all-American girl. That Veronica's bad news. But as I get older, I see the attraction to Veronica. Sassy. This in here, he kind of had the fingers and stuff not finished off, so I like that. I get to do a little bit more drawing as I'm inking than figuring it out. The classic patented little triangle nose from Archie. I love it. It's just a brilliant design. They're just catching the bottom of the nose with one little triangle. Whoever first did that, I don't know if it was Bob Montana or if it was Stan Goldberg or Dan DiCarlo. Whoever patented the Archie nose, that was the best move ever. The Archie girl's nose, I should be more specific. Alright, get some little movement flowing in her hair, blowing in the wind here, in the ponytail. And as you can see, I haven't had to re-dip my brush in quite some time. Again, that's the Kolinsky Sable holding a lot of ink. They're a watercolor brush, but they're, primarily a watercolor brush, and they work terrific for inkers. Alright, Betty's got some polka dots. Throw those in there a little bit. And no, I have not forgotten their eyeballs. The eyeballs is the one thing, when I ink Archie, that's the only really thing in some fine backgrounds where I get out the technical pens. So as soon as I get these last few polka dots in, alright, got a little bit of some delicate abdominal. So I use the nice Stettler pigment liners or microns. These are great, they're color fast, and you just have a little bit more control than the brush for these tight circles. They want these ovals or circles to be precise at Archie Comics. And then some of the little stuff in the background too. I'll get a super, like a 005 for these clouds, so that they're very thin and delicate lines. And that's all I really use the markers for. Some of the fine stuff in the background, eyeballs. Let's do some shadows, some more water here, and this guy's done. Rippling water. A little bit of shadow where Veronica's leg is in there. Alright, we got a little shadow on Veronica. This is nice when you have a little bit of a dry brush thing going here. She's laying on a beach, so if your brush is a little bit dry, it actually gives an appearance of like sand, which looks really nice. A little texture on here, a couple of little dots. And I believe we have just
My father worked in a grocery store, and he would bring home the comics that they had on the news rack, and I would draw my own comics, and I spent a lot of time in my parents' basement drawing comics when I was a grade schooler. So all I really wanted to do was graphic storytelling and you know, telling stories with images and cartoons. And I got a job doing caricatures at a Six Flags theme park. It was my summer job when I was in college, and I fell in love with the art of caricature. I started getting my work out in front of art directors and publications, magazines, and comics. Eventually got a shot doing a comic book for a company out of Chicago called Married with Children, the comic book, which was based on the Fox TV show. So it was very mad-like. You know, I did caricatures of Ed O'Neill and Katie Seagal and the stars of the show, and I did probably about 25, 30 issues of that over a couple of years. Then I did a little mini-series for Marvel. The thing about being a freelancer is you don't just start doing it. You know, you have to slowly build a clientele until you get enough client work that you feel like you can make a living at it. Back in the mid-90s, I realized that digital was the future of illustration. I got a computer, I taught myself Photoshop, I had a very early Wacom tablet, and started trying to do at least color work and deliver a digital file, which I thought was the important thing. Today, I mostly do my conceptual drawings on the Cintiq or digitally, and then I ink and do pencils the old-fashioned way on paper. And then I scan that in and I do all my color work digitally now. So haven't picked up my watercolors in many years. It's all the digital in there. So I kind of go back and forth. And I've really started to love doing conceptual work digitally because it's great to be able to, you know, decide to move things around and resize things, and you can experiment a lot more without having to painstakingly erase and redraw things. You know, it's just, there's so much more versatility there. So the computer has become a really important tool in the creative process for me. The movie and TV parodies I do for Matt are traditional comic book type stuff, you know. So it's a lot of panels, and it's a lot of, you know, switching camera angles and that type of thing. So it's just very versatile and quick to be able to do it this way. If I don't like what I'm doing, I can lose that layer, I can make it bigger, I can move it around, play with the composition. And when the Cintiqs came out, that revolutionized it for me, because now it was my natural drawing process, but digitally, you know. And so I was able to transition to doing actual drawing, not just coloring between the lines. The things that came naturally to me I could now do. and it was like an eye-opener, you know. So I think I'm on my third generation Cintiq right now. I've got a big one in the studio, I got a portable one I bring with me when I'm on the road working. So invaluable tool.
Well, the process of doing a strip, I guess, starts with me. And it starts with sitting in a chair, staring at a wall, overhearing a conversation.
But the ideas come from all over the place, our friends, family.
Eventually, if I get a thought, an idea, or just a hint of something that seems interesting, in my mind, I invite the cast in, and they start talking, and I let them improv, and I listen and I listen. If I get to a funny line, which sounds like a punchline, then I can back up 3 spaces and cut it off, and then there's a joke. From that point, write the strip in the form that Rick accepts it. I send him a script.
Jerry will send me an email with a week's worth of gags. When I read one of Jerry's gags, it's kind of on a screen in my head, and I just kind of translate that onto paper. I pencil it in on a piece of paper, then I scan it, send it to Jerry.
When I can make those dialogue changes, then I can make suggestions to the art, something that might get the idea across easier. Once we agree on that, then he does the finished artwork from that. The next time I see it is when it arrives on my computer at the same time it arrives at the newspaper syndicate. It's a contest. We're trying to get the eye of the reader, and I want to win that contest as many days as we can.
His name is Don Carlton, and Don is an inker for Doonesbury. The thing that you get from Doonesbury by fax machine is a strip, and it's just very lightly done. Pencil? Does he do it in pencil?
Gary and I both have a set of those boards pre-printed with the panel lines and by Doonesbury by Gary Trudell on it. And he has in his studio, usually in New York, and he works in pencil. He works by himself, by the way. Well, he has an assistant there to kind of keep his files straight, but he doesn't have anybody. He doesn't have a gag writer or anybody really to bounce anything off of. It's just it's a lonely existence, just as mine is out here. And he works in pencil.
You start to ink it in. That's step number 2.
As soon as it gets the fax machine has stopped rattling, I have to start. The ink had better be in my hands or I'm late.
That's right. And he says, "Where is it?"
And well, he doesn't say it, but the syndicate has already made 2 or 3 phone calls to me, like, "Where are we standing on the day?" That's right. And so I then take it to a light table and tape it to the back side of one of my blank boards, and I start working in ink as fast as I can.
Then you write in the
balloons. This started 3 years ago when Gary insisted I come kicking and screaming into the computer age. We put our lettering on a computer font. So I now take the drawings that you see there, the bare bones pen and ink drawing. I then take them to a computer scanner, scan it, put it into my not my iMac, into my Mac, and using Photoshop, I type in the lettering, fit the lettering in, put the blacks in, do a lot of retouch.
Turn out 7 a week, a Sunday, and 6 dailies a week. They come in bunches. They come at funny times. I can't write every day because every day is not funny. Some days I wake up and go, I am funny today. You know, you're well rested, something, you're just a good mood, and you can write 2 or 3 or 4 gags that day. Or sometimes I'll take a week, and a week I can write a month's worth of gags. And so that's the beauty of it. You know exactly where you stand with your, workload and things like that. So I'm far enough ahead that I've got the leisure of, you know, getting sick, being depressed if I want, because I'm going to have that good funny time before deadline to create some more strips. Because I believe you have to be having fun to do the strip for people to have fun reading the strip. Something translates through. You cannot fool the readers.
I had to go buy it, dude. A little expensive. On the first one, Thomas Day, it's got like 5 or 6 men's
Jim Lee's the man. We love you. We'll wait all day for you.
We'll be waiting half a day, that's for sure.
Hey, somebody. Okay, I came here yesterday and I heard my family or my
So I make this up today. Martin. Martin? From ART. Yep. Thank you.
Around the same time that I started doing the Three Geeks, I landed my first professional job with Archie Comics in a really strange way. I started in animation, and one of the shows that we were storyboarding in animation was Sonic the Hedgehog, and the people that were doing Sonic the Hedgehog over at Sega really liked the way we storyboarded, so they asked Archie Comics, who got the licensing to do Sonic, if we could do the comic book. So my friend and myself, Art Mawini, who I was working on as a storyboard artist, got into Archie that way, which was terrific for me because I grew up reading Archie comics. And after Sonic, I was lucky enough to get hooked up with Rex Lindsay and do my favorite character of all. I worked on Jughead for years. I think I did, oh boy, I must have inked, I would say 100 issues or so of Jughead. So Jughead's my favorite. I just like Jughead's. He's smart, he's funny, he's always got a quick witted answer to most questions, and you know, I love his sarcasm. So here's a quick Jughead, and not quite Archie style, but my style is a little bit different flair to him. You can tell it's Jughead, but you can see a little bit of my influence, I guess, in it as well. So I do a lot of Jughead sketches at conventions for people, Archie fans. I love the crown. I mean, that's his signature look. Everybody knows who Jughead is by that infamous crown. Many people don't know how the crown originated, but back in the 40s, kids would make these crowns out of old baseball hats. They would flip out the inner seam and flip them over, and their moms could sew them so that they would, and then they would cut them so that they could make these little reverse crowns. And that is what his crown is actually made out of, just an old baseball hat. All right, so Jughead's got the long pointy nose, squinty eyes, because he's lazy. And of course, my daughter, my 11-year-old daughter, always asks, what's the S on his chest stand for? And that is one of the Archie universe's most deeply held secrets, and I have no idea what the answer really is. There's a quick little Jughead.
This is how we draw Garfield. Garfield actually is in 3 equal parts. If you draw 3 circles, just like this, you got all the Garfield parts, the head, the belly, and the feet. Now from here, I start with the eyeballs. The eyeballs are like the windows to the soul, and they're the most important part because they're the expression. And you can see I start with 2 circles and work them like this. We're working at like a 3/4 angle, and then on top of that I put his ears. Everything that's expressive on Garfield is large. You notice he has the big eyes and then this big mouth. And that way when he smiles very big. And this is very important in getting the humor and to helping the character act as well. Now we round out this top circle with the jaws and his big cheeks and getting little cat whiskers up here. You notice how they're kind of fall down with the weight of gravity there. And also, Garfield isn't perfect circles. Notice this. Look how there's this natural weight. He looks like a water balloon. And that just makes him look like he's actually grounded somewhere. And underneath this, then we do the same thing with the belly. Notice how it's flattened and rounds a little more here. Here's his back shoulder and his bottom. And then the arms hang not straight down, but they have a little bit of bend to them. Everything's a little bit angular, you'll notice. And this keeps everything soft and flowing and animated. And this is his hand he's waving, so we use these little motion lines like this to indicate movement up and down. So do some more stripes here. I just do little squiggles for the stripes. I'm doing a drawing like this. Now here, we do his feet. Now he doesn't have little tiny cat feet. He has big feet to give him some natural weight. That's so he doesn't fall over. Finish this out and give him another foot back there. Again, everything's real rounded and very flowing. And this, I think this is funnier. It's just funnier to have lines like this. If the lines are real straight, then they're real stiff, and there's not much humor. You know, everything, they look like they're very uncomfortable when they move around. So let's see. And don't forget, when you're done here, put some little shadows under the character so it looks like you're standing on the ground. And the most important part, of course, is signing your work. So put your signature underneath like this. There you have it. That's how we draw Garfield. A few years later, I would say about 1980, 85, you'll notice those things on Garfield that were expressive got larger. The eyes got larger. And the ears got smaller because they weren't as expressive. And bear in mind, by this time, newsprint was very expensive. Newspaper comics were shrinking in a lot of papers. So the editors were making the strips smaller, and I had to make all the features larger. So Garfield had this real round face and these real round eyes. And his body got a little bit smaller here. The limbs got a little bit longer, so they got a little more animated right here. And so he was becoming, I think, aesthetically pleasing, a little nicer looking cat. I remember back when I got started with this, when I first sent the submission into the syndicate, I'd been trying for years and years, and the president of the syndicate called and he said, you know, he said, I think we'll syndicate Garfield. He said, but at that time I didn't have any stripes on the cat at all. He said, I'll syndicate him if you give the cat stripes. And I thought, stripes! Brilliant! Why didn't I think of that before? You know, of course, then I put stripes on Garfield and we got syndicated. And so to this day, I've had to draw about 8 million stripes on Garfield. But it gives him personality. Here's one of Garfield's favorite places to be. He's in his bed. This is why he's smiling. He makes no apologies for being lazy. There we go.
saying that, you know, we were talking about the success you had with this venture. Was there any negative effects of becoming so successful?
I can't honestly think of a downside to all the stuff we've been doing, because for every, you know, for all the hard work, all the extra time, cost, it still provided, you know, provided us with so much rich experience, you know, and gave us so much background on everything we do. Just, I guess, natural depth to the kind of material, you know, we work with. That it's all been worth it. It's been hard work, you know, it's been a few tears, but an awful lot of laughter with all of this, and so that makes it worth the extra effort.